Okay, I'm here with daps from NRG. So thanks for joining me, daps. It's been a long time. I've been wanting to get you onto the podcast.
Yep, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's cool that we can make time at the event. And I think the first thing I wanted to ask you before we really get into NRG, which has been obviously your most successful team, really, is there's been a long period of time when it felt like you kind of disappeared from top flight Counter-Strike, and before that, it was a situation where you would seemingly really help to build up teams, and then you'd be sort of cut away. So what was that whole sort of process like? Why was that happening? Is it just because it just didn't fit, or what was the situation like?
Yeah, I think going back to sort of the teams I was on in the past, such as Liquid and Optic, were like the two big names, I guess you could say. There's a few other teams in between. I mean, they're all sort of the same team, just under different names. But I think the big issue is sort of, I'd say, partially me not being developed as a leader, I think, as part of it. And also, I think the players I had played with, obviously some of them are world-class names now, but I think I played with some of the players when they weren't as developed either, obviously. So I think I think on Liquid, I definitely was not ready yet at that point. So I think actually being replaced on Liquid helped me a lot in my career. And sort of going on to Conquest, which turned into Optic, I think I was close to being ready at that point, but I still think even some of the players I was playing with weren't as developed at the time, and even myself, I think I had a lot to work on still. So I think being replaced on teams can actually be a healthy thing in terms of growth. But I think just right now our team is a perfect mix, and I think even some of the players on our team currently can develop further.
Yeah, I like the sort of point, just sort of the growing experience, because sometimes from the outside perspective, it's people don't really think about what something might look like in a year, or what a player might look like in a year. It's very difficult to know, of course, and for me, it was actually really surprising to see you come back again, and a very pleasant surprise because, as you said, you were more ready. Obviously, I think the results do speak for themselves. So, going across, a lot, those many lessons, was there one that stood out in particular, or what was really a defining moment for you to feel more ready?
I'd say being replaced on Optic was sort of an eye-opener. I definitely would always have a problem where I'd always be very motivated at the start of a team, and then as a team went on, I'd sort of lose motivation in a way or get complacent. So I think that's one thing I had to work on. And then even sort of trying to adapt my calling style was something I always needed help on, and I think I sort of know many different ways to call the game instead of before I'd call one way. But I think definitely being replaced on Optic was the catalyst, I'd say. Obviously, I had 1 year on NRG where we didn't do anything, but I think that was mainly caused by inter-team turmoil and sort of the players we were playing with. And once we got rid of the players we needed to, I think the results speak for themselves.
So just going back to that point you made about calling styles, can you sort of elaborate a little bit further, especially for those who aren't really as familiar with how calling works or how in-game leading works in Counter-Strike?
Yeah, so the way I always used to call, or my calling style at the start of calling in terms of even like before I was on Liquid, I always used to call very like fast-paced contact stuff, which anything can work in Counter-Strike. That's the one thing you have to know is like even something that looks bad can work. So the way I used to call it was sort of just very like risky, you can say, because it's very like you don't really get information. You're just hoping you're running into a setup with your whole team that's weak to what you're doing. And then on Liquid, I played with Adren, the American one, and he sort of like showed me the better way to call in terms of like increasing your percentage to win the round, which is just like default heavy, taking map control, like the proper way to play Counter-Strike, as people say. And then I sort of fell into a trap, I think, where I was pretty decent at calling like basic Counter-Strike, like taking map control and stuff, but I think I fell into a trap where I just called that way all the time instead of like taking more risks. And then I think on this team, I sort of focused on like every certain way I could call the game. So like whether that's we're playing like some teams, for example, like MIBR or SK, what they used to be, they're a team where I found defaulting versus them is very difficult because of the way Fallen plays and just all the players they have on their team. It's like it's very hard to default against a team that has like very aggressive oppers who are willing to take risks. Even Stewie, Tarek, these people will flank you at certain times if you're not playing correctly. So I found the most successful way to play versus them is just calling quick stuff, because you're just going to like most likely win the round if they're trying some weird play. So I think there's many ways to call. You can call, like I said, 4-1s. You can fake a lot. You can default a lot. You can just rush stuff. So I think just sort of adding all those type of things into my calling was a big catalyst, I think.
Do you think that's, do you think there's more bang for buck when it comes to like calling? Because obviously, part of the calling is about reading the other team and reading the situation. But part of calling also is having, maybe some hints from some prior preparation or research that you've done ahead of time. So where do you think, is there more of a focus with NRG with you maybe being more feeling based, understanding, trying to get into the head of the other guy, as the game's happening? Or do you think that do you have an even split between that and research, or how does it work?
It's 100% for us, especially like even we're still trying to figure out what the best way to prepare is, because at the minor, you could technically say for the minor we prepared the most in terms of just pure hours being put in. And I think it backfired on us because we were already the favorite, so technically we shouldn't even be considering our team that much. And the one factor you have to put in, and the reason I think it is opponent-based, is because even a team like North, we know North is a team that anti-strats a lot, so watching a lot of demos of them could be dangerous, because you could be like, oh, they do this a lot, but in reality they're going to play different versus you because they're going to be like trying to counter things you do a lot. So you have to kind of take into account which teams do what. It's the same thing with a team like Liquid. Liquid's a team we play all the time, and we know they play in scrims. So even at this event when we beat Liquid, we didn't really prep that much for Liquid because we already know they play. Like I watched like a few demos to like brush up, but I think it is 100% matchup based. And once you start to learn your opponents better, it makes it easier. But yeah, I kind of like ramble a bit there.
No, it's completely fine.
Yeah.
That's what I do. That's this is the place to do it. But if there is any,
I don't know if I answered your initial question.
No, it's good. Yeah. So I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. It's difficult to find the perfect way to prepare, and as you say, like also, I think it's very true. In Counter-Strike, I think one of the most amazing things about it is that anything can work. I think that's why for me it's been really interesting watching NIP having a good time of things recently. Not to say that they're making stuff that's bad work, but I feel like they're one of the teams where they're very confidence based, and maybe you could make the argument that they don't have as much depth, as an Astralis, for example. So and that just makes things more interesting to watch. And speaking of the North match, as you brought it up, obviously that was a really big game. I think you guys got some really good starts. Like first map was Nuke. You got like the 11-4 T side start, but North did play really really well. Like in that series, I think that maybe there was a level of misfortune for you guys just because of like North are one of these teams recently where their highs can be really high, but they're not super consistent. And yesterday they were pretty damn good. So like run me through like what your general thoughts are on what were on that series.
I mean, I feel like we played better on Nuke personally, even on T side, even though they technically got more T rounds than us. I think the way they call on T side is pretty gimmicky in my opinion. I felt like we just got rushed upper every round, and if we just got caught off guard a lot, it felt like. And I feel like that play style can work because that's how I used to call. I remember even playing when MSL used to be on Dignitas. When we were Conquest, we beat them at Sivaland and a BO3 when we were not favored to win at all. And I literally just we didn't even like practice that much back then. We just rushed everything and won. They were blatantly the better team, but we just played like gimmicky Counter-Strike, rushed them, caught them off guard, and won. And I'm not saying they can't play like slower and structured. Maybe I'm wrong. I haven't rewatched the match, but I felt like Nuke we played better, and we lost 1v3 to Cadian, 1v5 to Valde, and yeah, it felt like it should have been a 2-0 series for us, but I can't take anything away from them. they definitely deserve to win cash. We didn't play that well on it, and they played a lot better on cash.
Yeah, some of those clutches were ridiculous. Like the funny thing for me is that when I was watching it, I don't know if you've rewatched some of them, but the Valve one didn't look actually that bad. It's very difficult, I think, sometimes to play things correctly and to sort of sync up as a team. For me, the Cadian one was crazy because I don't know if you've seen that one back, but he dived through the door and shot maybe like 2 or 3 bullets blind into the smoke and got the kill.
Yeah, I was defusing.
It looked ridiculous.
He's just lucky I had like 10 HP or something.
Yeah.
And one bullet connected on me.
Absolutely nuts. So crazy. So, yeah, I mean, Counter-Strike's crazy. So generally, moving into sort of the rest of the series, any other thoughts you want to add about it? Like any things that maybe you learned or any takeaways, or is it sort of too early to sort of like how does that process even work for you guys? Like because obviously with any top team, you've got to learn from your mistakes or learn from matches where you can. Where do you find the balance there? Is every match a learning experience, or are some matches just you close the book on it and move forwards?
It's hard to say because obviously we had a share of clutches as well. I think Peter from HLTV tweeted that was like the most clutches that's ever happened in a top tier BO3 or something. It was 24 in one series. So I think definitely there's things to take away, but I mean the main problem keeps persisting where our CT sides are just really bad and I don't know why. So that's definitely something we have to work on because our T sides keep getting better and our CT sides keep getting worse, honestly, and I'm not 100% sure why. I think mainly it's communication. Part of it is not knowing how to trade proper. There's so many issues.
Yeah, some small things.
Yeah, it's not a one solution thing. It's multiple problems across many maps. So,
do you think Astralis have the best CT sides of the top level? Maybe you could argue they're the best everything, but
yeah, I think it's hard to argue that they don't have the best everything currently. I think some teams play. No, I don't think any team plays better than they do. I think some teams have more skill than they do, technically. But I think Astralis is just such a well-rounded team that you can't really argue against them. Because, like, even Nuke is one of the most CT-sided maps. Like, Train and Nuke are the most CT-sided maps in CSGO currently, statistically. And we average like less than 7 rounds on Nuke, I think, in every match pretty much. Which is horrible. It's terrible. I don't know why. And we've even like switched spots. So I don't know what the solution is for us on Nuke, but our T-side Nuke's good. We like usually get a lot of rounds T-side. So we definitely have a lot to like try and figure out, honestly.
And speaking briefly about your own performances, aside from just being an in-game leader, obviously we are in the era, I suppose, of the hybrid player. Just generally speaking, you kind of want, like, no matter what the dominant role is for a player, that player to be able to do everything. And I actually saw you picking up the AWP and playing well with it on Cash, for example. And obviously you are a very well-rounded player yourself. And criticism always falls onto in-game leaders for fragging. And obviously this can be a very one-dimensional outlook in some regards because the context is often missing in the statistics, the way that we have them currently these days, until more advanced tools are developed and proliferated. But for you, it looked like you were performing really, really well individually in that last series. Like, how do you feel about that whole dynamic of your individual play versus? It's okay, I can edit it out. Versus other teams. Like, do you feel like you're up to par? Like, how do you feel about your play?
Yeah, you definitely have to look at the context of, because like when people compare in-game leaders, they generally just go to stats, right? So the thing you have to consider is what roles is the in-game leader playing. So if you compare me to an in-game leader like Stanislaw, for example, Stanislaw generally is he's set up mainly for clutches, right? So he's usually one of the last people alive. He's put in some pretty good spots. I'm not saying Stanislaw doesn't ever entry frag, but he generally is always like going to be LMS. So that gives him a lot more opportunity to maybe get some easier kills. People are lower HP. He's put in better positions to do well. And then you look at Zeus. Zeus generally entry frags, right? So it's hard to like if you compare just pure aim wise. I don't know where I stack up versus other in-game leaders. I don't think my aim is necessarily worse than others, but I think me doing well in the North Series is an example of when entry fragging goes well. Because on Nuke, I was just flying outside hitting shots, and it's like that's an example of entry fragging gone right. And then but entry fragging is generally very hard because you're going first. You're generally gonna die. Your main job is to get information, and your teammate trades off you. So generally, T side my stats won't be that good. And then also you have to consider for in-game leaders, is the in-game leader dropping guns to their better players? So like, what I will usually do is if I have a rifle and like Ethan has a SMG, I'll switch for the SMG, right? And not even Zeus really does that on Na'Vi, because you saw there's a thread about how Simple wants to give Zeus the M4 because Simple can do well with a Deagle.
Right,
you know?
yeah, that's a bit backwards, I feel like, yeah.
So, well, it makes I understand their logic on it, but
right.
It's the opposite for our team. So like I generally will do everything I can to help everyone else on the team perform, which will again affect my stats, right? Because even on a map like Mirage, there's been so many times where I'm solo B with like a CZ and some nades, right? And it's impossible to hold that. We're just hoping they don't go B pretty much. So yeah, I don't. I've been shit talked about my stats my whole career, so it doesn't really affect me. But I don't think I think I can compete at the top level in terms of thinking and knowledge. Obviously, there's a lot of games where I could play better skill wise, but yeah, I feel like I'm close. I've definitely played better this year in terms of my other years. So at least there's improvement. But yeah, you just got to look at the context of what the in-game leaders do. Even Glaive, Glaive has had better stats than like half his team at tons of events. So like Glaive's like an exception, but even he's put in like important roles where like he has to frag and he does frag. So he steps up to the plate and does that well. But yeah, I mean, it just depends. Like even Fallen's an in-game leader, but he's an opper, right? So he's generally going to always perform better than a rifling entry frag or IGL, because oppers have to perform. And generally oppers do, like, I don't think I've ever seen an opper under a 1 rating in any scenario. It's pretty hard to like do bad as an opper because you're generally set up for a lot of things. You're in favorable positions all the time. It's pretty easy to get at least 1 kill with an op around. So opping IGLs will always have better stats than rifling IGLs in most scenarios. If you're just talking about stats, I can't really think of any other IGLs.
It's just amazing to hear about how much it varies, because it didn't used to be like this. Like it didn't used to be so diverse.
Yeah, and then you have IGLs who are just thrown into the role. So you have like Tarek, for example, who is thrown into it on Optic. You have Nitro currently, who's thrown into opping and IGLing. But you also have to like, you'll never know the quality of the calling though, because the other factor is how much is the team helping that person. And it's not to take anything away from IGL, because like no matter what, an IGL can only do so much. If you have a team that doesn't give you any information, then your calling's going to be bad, because to make proper calls, to make proper high percentage calls, you have to have proper information to make those calls. You know a caller is good or bad when, like, let's say a caller has all the information and they still make the wrong call. That's a bad caller. If you have a call, you can have a caller that's good, but their team doesn't give them any information, then it's just it's a guessing game at that point. Like if I'm defaulting on Mirage and my team doesn't give me any information, then I just have to guess. We go A or B, you know? They could all be A because we have no information, so it's just 50-50 at that point. So yeah, I think the IGL role is very misunderstood. I think some people do get it, but there's so many factors that affect an IGL's play statistically. Obviously, I'm not saying like if I was put in better roles, I would just carry the game. That's not. I probably couldn't do that. I definitely couldn't do that. It's a lot of pressure to be like a star player as well. But I think every IGL is different in terms of how they support their team. The way I support my team is I generally go first so that they have more room to do well. I don't generally set myself up ever for any plays or anything. And some IGLs do set themselves up. Because some IGLs, like I have faith in my team to close rounds out. I think some IGLs should be the lurker because even in the Stanislaw situation, I think Stanislaw is the best clutcher on that team. So even though he's the IGL, and generally you don't want the IGL, in my opinion, to be last, I think Stan is the best suited for that role in that team. So I think it makes sense in that case. Even Steele on Ghost Gaming, I think Steele is probably the smartest player on that team. So Steele's going to try and set himself up more, I feel, to do well. And I think that makes sense personally. When you start playing with better players, though, I think that's when IGLs have to start making more sacrifices. And I think I've always been fortunate in my career to play with like pretty good players. So I don't think I've never in my career like set myself up in that type of situation. So
how do you think it? Actually, quickly, I really like the idea about the calling can only be as good as the communication in the team. It sort of makes me think of, I don't know if you ever really played or watched StarCraft, but it's like in StarCraft, like you'll send out like a worker to like early in the game to go see like what are they doing, right? And I was just thinking to myself, imagine if that worker, the probe or drone or whatever, doesn't, like, you just don't see anything, they doesn't give the information back to you. And often in that case, it can be like one key building goes up or like one specific timing, and the next 3 minutes of what that player will be doing. And so to not get that information, that one, especially if you have done some preparation and you've seen some tendencies and you know that one thing leads to another, and not to have the information, I can definitely see like how that's always been the intangible for like from a spectating perspective that can be really frustrating, because sometimes it's really obvious how a team is thinking by how they're moving around the map, and you can really see what they're trying to do, and it can look really smart and you can really appreciate it. But sometimes it's difficult because you can't hear that information being exchanged in the team. So I do hope in the future that we'll get more situations where we can maybe get like a look into comms of teams to be able to better appreciate maybe how the calling and the communication exchange goes. But one thing I want to ask you about, because as you said, you have been fortunate to be able to play with good players, and specifically with NRG, you've had this really cool opportunity. I guess like similarly when you were in Liquid, but as you said, sort of that was the players were a little bit less developed back then, and but they were very young players, and you yourself weren't quite ready yet as well. And now with NRG, it's like almost similar. You've got a lot of talent on the team that you fostered, like very young players. You have had never played really at this level before. Ethan had been in CLG, which maybe wasn't the best culture or team to really foster his growth and lead his growth. And the same thing with Breeze as well, just really plucked out of obscurity. People thought he cheated to begin with, and there was a lot of controversy there as well. And obviously Cirque came over with obviously massive talent, but didn't have that experience at Top Flight CS. Not communicating in his native language. Like, it's very interesting. You had this group of really talented players, and so what has the process been like? Like almost just fathering their talent. Like, how did you approach that?
I wouldn't like, the thing about this team is that Ethan, for an example, I think he's fairly mature for his age, because I've had players that are older who haven't really like given as much input as he has, and even just like wanted to put in extra time. I think the big thing is just everyone on this team sort of gets along. I think is the big thing. I wouldn't say like I did anything different in terms of fostering the talent or anything like that. I think just we have fairly good practice regimen. We generally all understand everything we want to do and accomplish in a map. And I think the big thing is just the team. There's no like, every team I've been on other than this team has had like two players that really don't get along. And I think that builds over time and eventually just sort of destroys any sort of team chemistry you have. And I think sort of the fact that the whole team gets along makes the whole team work a lot better. Because even at the start of the year, if you saw our roster before any of our success, no one expected us to be top 10, maybe like 20th, top 15 was where people put us. So I think we've definitely overachieved this year. Obviously, expectations will increase considering we've had success. I don't think I can't really pinpoint anything specific I would have done in terms of just like, I think the main thing I changed this year from other years is at this very start of the year, I told people I wanted to focus on individuals more than the team. So I wanted people to improve themselves more so rather than improving. Because, like, my focus, my whole career has always been about the team, you know? Like, we have to, like, run this strat, this strat, this strat. Like, anyone can do that. I don't think focusing on strats and setups is that important. I found making sure people individually understand the game better and making sure they're watching demos to get better at the spots they play, and even just like watch other people in clutch situations, things they do, their thought process. I think that helped people a lot. So I think that's the main thing I changed was even myself. I focused on myself for once more than the team as a whole. So I think that's one of the main things I changed.
I really like that idea because I think you're right. I think the example I always think of when we look at this idea is I think about Sean Gez and some of the teams or teammates that he has had to deal with in the past, where he would have some maybe very talented players, but it always would appear like he's having to micromanage them like desperately, as though he has to really think for them and teach them the basics about rotations or what exactly like a strategy what might happen. As far as the other team's decision making when you run certain strats, or like understanding which cues will mean what, like some pretty basic things that you would expect a pro player to know. But obviously, when you watch a team like Astralis, you can really see like everybody just know, like everybody will get certain information, and then everybody knows exactly how everyone else will be reacting to it on the team, and they just know the most correct thing to do. And it's like no hesitation, no thinking there, and that's so powerful to watch. And it does seem you guys are a very good team as well because of that. So is there anything else you think that, or what would be the priority right now? You mentioned the CT size, but is there anything else that you think is an issue within the team or something you would like to see improve or be better?
It's mainly just communication, in my opinion. I think going back to the point you just made about Sean having to micromanage, I think we do have troubles with that as well at times. But I think T side, it's a little easier because I can control everything. And I think CT side, I think we maybe have gone a little lazy on sort of like watching demos individually and trying to like improve our spots. And because there are times where like I'll look on radar and there's like a play we could maybe make. And I think I've said it in the past. I think the one team our team might lack is a player that is sort of like I call it like a wild card player. So like a Stewie or like a Tarek type player who will just like make that push through a smoke that like wins you the match type thing. I think our team has 5 players who play proper Counter-Strike, and sometimes that's a bad thing, honestly. And I think if we had a player that sort of not necessarily had a player, but if someone just stepped up and like sort of made those risks and choices all the time, I think it could help us a lot. Because CT side, I think we're easily readable at times because we do play pretty like standard. We do take some risks, but they're like set risks. They're not random. And I think sometimes having a player who's just willing to like just randomly push something can help a lot. And I think a lot of the players on our team are afraid to do that at times because they don't want to lose us in the match, right? Is the mindset. Yeah. So I think that's like a big negative there.
That was always the crazy thing with Fur, because that's what Fur would do for SK back when they had their super dominant era. And one of the crazy things about SK as well is that they always seem to be a team that they knew very, very well, like exactly how to play from every single scenario. No one needed micromanaging. It almost seems like that team didn't need a caller almost. Like obviously Fallen is a caller, but it felt like a lot of the work had been done in the practice, in building the team and the individuals, that when they go into the match, everyone can just get into the zone because no one really has to really think about anything. They just already understand how everything works. So it is interesting, that like element of randomness and unpredictability. And going to that team again, one thing that they were credited with they were credited with being hard to counter strat because they were so good at having defaults that can branch out in so many different ways, and so it's very difficult to know how to attack that. From a strategical side of things with NRG, you kind of happy with where you're at the moment on the top level?
I think on our T side, yeah, I think T side we have on every map we have pretty much every strat you commonly see that works from every team. I think we could do a better job of having like set reactions, because I feel like a lot of the time I am having to call on the fly instead of like having it set, and I think having like set reactions off certain scenarios is a good thing. The problem is just like it's very hard to do that and have everything set, I feel. And sometimes our team has a problem with forgetting certain things, even strats we've been running for like 3 or 4 months. So, but in terms of T side, I think our T side is very good considering even some of the problems we have. CT side is just, I don't know what it is. I think sometimes we do. I think because like the way I used to have CT side set was each like side of the map would have a leader. Because like it's impossible if I'm like up or B on Mirage, I can't like call for the A guys because I have no idea what's happening there. It's impossible for me. Like I can make a call at the start of the round and make an assumption for something that might work, but in terms of like a mid-round decision, you know, those like I think our team struggles with those split-second decisions where like you hear a sound cue and you have to make a choice within like a second or two for it to work. And I think we really struggle with that because, again, on T side, generally T side, you have a plan at the start of the round. You're trying to execute that plan. If they do something that stops that plan, then you either cancel it and do something else, which is already going to be like dictated by me. And then, you know, the round's generally always like, you always know what you're doing on T side. CT side, I feel like you have a setup, but if they do something to screw that setup up and you don't have necessarily a set reaction for what's happening, I feel like we sort of go in limbo at that point. And
so you don't really quite have anybody to do the secondary calling. That's not
well. Ethan definitely is the most vocal out of the other 4 players. But I think just we need more of that, and I think we've talked about it so many times. We know our comms are bad, but it's that's kind of one of the things that's hard to fix, right? Because the easy things to fix are like missed smokes, strats, setups. You know, it's hard to fix the communication, and like the lucky thing we don't have to fix is people's attitudes, or like people fighting all the time and like being at each other's throats, which some teams do have even at the top level. So we're lucky we don't have like people fighting and like hating each other constantly. But the communicate, like I don't know how you fix communication. Some days we're very good with communication, and I think that's why we're inconsistent. It's because even versus NIP the first day here, we barely said a word. We were like taking forever to like just throw 2 smokes because we weren't sure who was throwing what. You know, we just played bad overall. Even I wasn't talking as much, which is bad.
Do you think it's to do with having sort of maybe too many sort of passive personalities? Maybe you could benefit from establishing some protocols. So instead of, because I know like in the past when I've dealt with teammates or even myself that if the game is not, if everyone's not like feeling good and into the game, it almost has this like emotional component where that will harm their comms massively, and it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy that then the game gets harder for you to perform well, and everyone starts shutting down a little bit. And communication does seem to be the first thing to go when people are feeling a little bit bad. And I know that for me in the past, it's helped to have like a system of protocols of like what is important information, what always has to be sort of, you know, given at various times. And so have you ever had like a really in-depth sort of a chat about how to structure it? Because I don't know if that many teams do.
On Conquest we did. I remember we had Mustang as a coach once, the old CGS pro. And he actually made like a Google Doc about like communication, just like the list of like what you go through, and he was like trying to change it, you know, like make it better. On this team, no, not really. It's not really a main thing we focused on. I think it's just mainly being prepared for a match and like waking up with proper amount of time, and even just like eating before the match and stuff. I think a lot of like nutrition and just like sleeping gets overlooked in the esports industry because it's not a physical sport, but in real sports it's like you have to like wake up early, make sure you eat like well before your game, make sure you're like feeling good physically and everything. And I think that stuff does affect people on this team.
That's a really good point. I just spoke with I don't know if you've had a moment to chat with him. There's a guy who's a sports performance coach in for like 10 years in the NFL and so on, and he's moved into esports. And I just did a podcast with him, and he was talking about bringing all that stuff to esports basically, and trying to help people to understand how to massively optimize their performance by some of these lifestyle habits, and like, you know, good sleep, understanding food, understanding how you know, blood flow, it can be important, and being able to move can be important. So it's an interesting one that you bring up, because I think like 2019 might be the year where more of this stuff starts coming in. I feel like 2017, 2018 was sort of the advent of sports psychologists in Counter-Strike. Speaking of which, like, how do you feel like the structure is within NRG, the support systems, like the coaching? Do you guys have a sports psychologist that comes in, or how does it work for you guys?
Currently, I think that's the one thing we really lack, is we don't really have much of a support system in terms of like any sort of third-party help. We have a manager and a coach, but that's pretty much it. We don't have like a nutritionist or a sports psychologist, or I think we were talking about getting a sports psychologist, but I'm not sure what the status of that is. So I think it's definitely something we will look to get in the future, because I think it's always good to have someone to talk to that has like more experience in terms of like the mental side of things. Because like obviously CSGO managers generally they're a manager, you know, and same with a coach. CSGO coaches are generally people who are either ex-players or they're just people who watch CS a lot. So I think that's definitely something that's necessary, and I've said it many times. I think that's a big reason why Astralis is so consistent now, is they do have that support system. Because there's teams like, even like I'd say Nico is more skilled than everyone on Astralis. Like there's teams that have better players than all the Astralis players in some way. It's just Astralis is just like such a well-built team organization. They have like outside support. They seem to all get along. Just everything like is good there. So I think it's definitely something we need personally, because like, again, it's hard to fix like the mental and like human things. Yes. Like the outside of CS things are the hardest things to fix. Sometimes they're not even fixable. And that's where like you have to replace people and stuff. So I think that's like definitely the next step for us.
Okay, we'll have to introduce you to Taylor Johnson then, to see if maybe...
Is he the guy with Optic?
Yeah, he was with Optic, yeah.
Yeah, I think I talked to him because Chet, our coach, knows him because he was with Optic.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's well, hopefully you guys can find something like that. I definitely think that it is the next step for many teams. And I guess as far as, you know, the future for NRG goes, like how do you feel about it? I mean, as you said, you had like an amazing year. We're about to come to a close. You know, you have an event in Malta. I don't know if you have anything for the rest of the year, but I imagine you're going to start slowing Malta. Down. After Pro League, does it start to slow down?
It's done after that.
Okay, so you got
two more events.
Cool. And then what happens? Everyone goes on holiday or relaxes?
Well, I guess we have the minor qualifier after Pro League.
Oh God, it doesn't end, does it?
So we have to qualify for the minor.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I said before, the goal for the end of the year is like at least do well at ECS or Pro League. I don't really consider we did well here. I mean, beating Liquid's good, but losing to North, I feel like if we beat North, I could have been happy with this result, but I think losing to North's pretty bad. Considering they're still like a pretty new team, we've been together a lot longer than them, I think we should be closing that out.
Do you think a best of three is a pretty decent test of skill, or do you feel like there is an element of variance there that's still is present that a team that is better could lose, or
Again, I think we're better than North personally. I think just we got caught off guard every round on Nuke CT side. We should have closed it out 2-0. in my opinion. I'm not
Right.
even
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah. Yeah.
talk shit. Just like,
No,
if
I
you
mean,
watch
yeah.
that game, like, we lost ridiculous rounds. We got 3 rounds on the most CT-sided map in the game, or 2 rounds, I think. Or yeah, 3 rounds. So, I don't know. And we even won pistol too. So, that's like a very bad CT side nuke. Um, I think we can be happy with this year regardless of the last 2 results, but you don't really know, like, you obviously have to like know how long a roster like should be together, right? Like, obviously a sports psychologist could help us get to the next level of consistency, because like when we play teams, we don't feel like we're getting outskilled when we lose. I think we just play poorly at times due to communication, and that's honestly the next step, is figuring out like how do we fix that, because I don't think we can, because like we've beaten Liquid, FaZe, MIBR, and BO3s, and those are like top 5 teams. So I don't think it's a skill issue at all. I don't think we need to bring in a player that just like destroys everybody. But like we just need to. I just don't know how to fix the communication issue.
Right. Yeah. Well,
Because it affects our consistency, and it's obvious.
Well, I think finding that support structure that could be really beneficial, as you mentioned as well. And I'm pretty confident you can find a solution. I mean, it sounds like the atmosphere in the team is good because everybody sort of vibes well together, and that is the most important thing to fixing any problems. So as they say, communication is the most important thing in any relationship.
Yep.
So to sort of wind down the conversation, I like to sort of ask for some, let's say, general advice that you might have for any players that are aspiring to get into in-game leading or anything like that. Do you have any general advice? Because obviously it's something that's always high in demand. So it's like being a plumber. It's never going to go out of fashion.
I mean, I definitely say focus on yourself first. I think the game's definitely come to a point where you can't be like a low fragging in-game leader anymore. So obviously, like, I'm considered a low fragging in-game leader, but I'm trying to fix that. I mean, you definitely have to focus on yourself first. Make sure you're playing well, you're making the right decisions, and your communication's good. And like, I feel like in-game leaders do have the most pressure, I feel, to be like overall the best player on the team. Make sure your attitude's good. Because even I've had tilting issues in the past, so I've had to work on like not getting as mad and stuff over dumb things. You have to know when to like you have to know when like to give criticism and when to not get to give criticism. You have to know your teammates, because certain people react to criticism differently. Obviously, like, I think esports players are a little more soft when it comes to like taking criticism, because generally they're younger. They probably haven't had much experience playing real sports. Because I know when I played sports like hockey, baseball, coaches just screaming at you, telling you you're shit. You're not playing the rest of the game. You fucked up. You're not playing. If you did that to a CS player, they like lose it. They'd be like, I don't want to play anymore. So I think it's a very tough job, because you have to know who you're talking to at all times. Some players just don't even take criticism. So I think your team depends on how hard or easy your job is. And then I say advice would be, again, just focus on yourself, make sure you're doing everything correctly as much as you can, and then try to find the right team. I think scouting for players and knowing how to build a team is underlooked, because if you're starting from the bottom, you're generally going to have to make your own team. You're not just going to be given a team as an in-game leader, because no random in-game leader will ever just get picked up by a pro team, even if they call everything perfectly. You have to have some pro experience. So I think honestly, maybe the step, if your goal is to be a pro in-game leader, would be to just be a good player first, and then maybe pick up in-game leading once you get to a higher level. I think if you try and become an in-game leader instantly, you probably won't make pro anymore. The landscape's too harsh. You'll never get a chance if you instantly try and become an in-game leader. But I think even if you're not trying to become an in-game leader, I think it's a good skill set to try in-game leading, to understand what an in-game leader is going through, because I've had tons of teammates in the past who are like, can I just try calling for today or whatever? And then they call and they're like, screw this, like, I don't want to do this anymore. Because people don't realize how much shit, because like when you always, I'm sure you've seen on many streams in-game leaders like yelling at their teammates or getting mad. Pretty much every team has had people getting mad at each other. And it's like, players' jobs are very easy because a player just has to show up and perform well and get told what to do generally. Whereas an in-game leader has to do all the preparation beforehand, make sure everything is going well during the game, and then also try not to get mad when people either don't listen or do something wrong after you've practiced it a million times. So, and it also can be really annoying when you call something and then someone forgets what they're doing, but like, everyone's role on every strat, and then they can't remember their only thing they do on the strat. So like, there's a lot of things that can piss in-game leaders off. So I think temperament is very important for a leader. And yeah, you got to be like all around a fucking great human to be like a top in-game leader, I think. And it's something that's pretty impossible, I think. Every in-game leader is going to have their weaknesses. It's just how you like handle that in-game leader's weakness and how it sort of meshes with the team. I think for me, like, my biggest weaknesses was definitely temperament for sure. And like, I'd always get pissed if people like do something dumb, and obviously like that can ruin the mood if people are like getting emo because they like fucked up and I'm being a dick about it. So yeah, I don't know. It's the advice to becoming in-game leader is you got to be pretty good in most areas.
Yeah, just be a good human
everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, like the whole like social intelligence aspect is like one of the most sort of, it's one of the hardest things that you have to be very self-aware, which is just like very difficult, especially with a lot of youngsters. But what do you do like when daps relaxes, like takes some time away from CS:GO? Like, what do you do to like? Do you have any other hobbies that contrast completely with gaming? Or
I play hockey occasionally, but generally I don't have time for that because we play like every day pretty much. No, generally my life currently is just gym, hockey, occasionally like once a week maybe, and then playing CS, and then traveling.
Yeah.
I guess traveling is a hobby. I do like to travel, so I guess like I got to do one of my hobbies while I'm doing my job.
Nice.
So it's not too bad.
Are you reading any books at the moment? Are you a book person? Are you into any podcasts or any like learning outside of the game?
Yeah, I read The Alchemist recently.
Oh, you did? Okay.
It's a decent book. And then I did buy the book
So what?
The
Robert
Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah.
Which is a book I've been suggested a lot. I haven't read it yet though.
Okay. Yeah.
And I read the 12 Rules to Life by Jordan Peterson.
Okay.
Those are like the recent books I read.
Awesome. I can recommend you one. Then it's, I think, by the person who wrote The Alchemist. I'm pretty sure. Robert Greene. The book is called Mastery. Really, really good book. Yeah, I can recommend that one.
I don't usually read fiction, but I read The Alchemist because I was suggested it by a lot of people. It was a good book.
Yeah, I haven't read that one yet. I've heard a lot of good things too.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, I guess that about wraps it up. Thank you very much for your time. We got a clean 49 minutes. So, thanks, daps.
All right. Thank you.